Picture this. A dusty Midwestern barn creaks open like it's revealing the Ark of the Covenant.
Yes. All right. I love it, Norm. Absolutely love it. And there it is, the Batmobile.
Dramatic music swells and two grown men stare at a pile of rust like it just whispered the secrets of the American dream. One of them says the words rusty gold with the seriousness of a war correspondent. And for a brief, beautiful moment, you're supposed to believe that this is history, real history.
When you see something like this, it's kind of spooky. It really talks to me.
It's crazy when you walk in. I mean, this place is so vast and empty inside.
Not the kind with wars and consequences, but the kind where a broken gas pump somehow represents freedom, hard work, and your grandpa's soul. This was American Pickers, or at least this was the version we were sold. The show arrived dressed up as wholesome, authentic, feel-good television. Two likable guys roaming the backroads of America, rescuing forgotten objects, preserving stories, and definitely not exploiting anyone along the way.
Where's your favorite place to pick? And we always say East Coast, because that's where America started, and that's where some of the oldest stuff is.
It aired on the History Channel, which at the time still pretended to care about history. And it wanted you to believe that digging through barns was basically archaeology, just with better banter and fewer ethics committees. But here's the problem. While the show was busy romanticizing dust, rust, and Americana,
And y'all said you had some carnival stuff. This is wild,
Yeah,
man.
circus and carnival. I love the circus, and I'm a sucker for anything circus related.
something else was quietly happening off camera. The authenticity was thinning, the friendships were cracking, the negotiations were, let's call them, strategic. And the line between preserving history and flipping nostalgia for profit started to look less blurry and more non-existent. Because American Pickers wasn't just about old stuff, it was about selling a fantasy where capitalism is charming.
In your sleep. They were sinister, and that's what I dig about them. What is something like this worth? I don't even know. I mean, I've never seen anything like it.
Everyone gets a fair deal, and reality TV somehow stays real. And like most fantasies on cable television, it worked beautifully, right up until it didn't. To understand why American Pickers worked so well at first, you have to remember the exact cultural moment it crawled out of the barn in. It premiered on January 18th, 2010, pulling in a frankly absurd 3.1 million viewers on its very first night, which at the time was a record-breaking debut for the History Channel. This wasn't just a success, it was a statement. Cable television had discovered that you didn't need explosions or celebrities if you could convince people that an old Coke sign was secretly a time machine.
I have a couple of drinks in me and I sit down and talk with them. I always joke around and tell them that the guys start talking to me.
The premise was deceptively simple. Two antique dealers, Mike Wolf and Frank Fritz, drove around rural America in a van, knocking on doors, digging through barns, and saving forgotten objects from decay. Back at home base was Danielle Colby, running the antique archaeology shop like the cool, tattooed voice of reason. The dynamic felt effortless, almost suspiciously so.
And they were probably all playing musical instruments. He was probably holding a guitar or something.
Wolf was the fast-talking visionary, Fritz the grounded, skeptical counterweight. Viewers quickly compared them to a modern-day Laurel and Hardy, except instead of slapstick, the punchline was capitalism with a folksy accent. And it landed perfectly. America was coming out of the 2008 financial crisis. People were disillusioned with flashy excess.
To a lot of circus auctions over the years, you're talking 35 years.
Look at this, it just keeps going, look.
And suddenly nostalgia felt safe again. Old stuff wasn't junk, it was heritage. The show didn't just sell antiques, it sold meaning. Every rusty motorcycle came with a story. Every handshake deal felt like proof that honesty still existed somewhere west of the interstate. By September 2010, the show was pulling over 5 million viewers in the coveted 25 to 54 demographic, making it the most successful new nonfiction series in the United States that year.
For these Felix Adler shoes is Roy's word. And you'd take $250 for these if you had to sell them?
Yeah.
Spin-offs followed, merchandise appeared, and Wolf even opened a second antique archaeology store in Nashville to keep up with demand. Against all odds, a show about dust and barns became a cultural phenomenon. But here's the thing about myths. They only work as long as nobody looks too closely at how they're made. And American Pickers was about to discover that the more popular a treasure hunt becomes,
I have something that's about to make life very good for you.
All right, good. We're kind of in a low point right now. Build us up.
Yeah, hit me with it.
the harder it is to pretend the map was never drawn in advance. At first, the cracks were small, hairline fractures in the fantasy, the kind you brushed off with phrases like, well, it's still TV, or, of course they edit things, because nobody wants to believe the cozy, rust-covered universe they escape into every Sunday night is being held together with duct tape and producer emails. But American Pickers didn't just age, it curdled.
You know what?
People are dying to work with this dude, Frankie.
I'm dying to get there.
I'm dying to pick him.
Let's get him.
One of the earliest warning signs was authenticity, or more accurately, how loudly the show kept insisting it had any. As the series exploded in popularity, viewers started asking a dangerous question. How are these guys still randomly stumbling across incredible collections after a decade on television? The answer was simple: they weren't. Locations were being scouted in advance, collections were vetted, sellers were contacted long before the cameras ever rolled. Mike Wolfe eventually admitted that cold knocking wasn't really possible anymore because they'd become too famous.
My dad, he died and left it to me, and of course, I've gathered up a lot on my own.
Now, to be fair, he was careful with the wording. Staged, yes. Scripted, no. Which is basically reality TV's favorite loophole. We didn't fake it, we just scheduled reality. But for a show built entirely on the thrill of accidental discovery, this mattered. The magic was never the antiques. The magic was that it felt like luck. Once that illusion cracked, everything started feeling more like a transaction and less like an adventure.
What are you thinking?
Oh, probably $250 for the three of them.
And then came the ethical questions. Fans began pointing out a pattern that was hard to unsee once you noticed it. Mike and Frank routinely bought valuable items for shockingly low prices from sellers who clearly didn't understand what they had. The most infamous case involved an elderly collector who sold a rare antique saddle for a fraction of its real value.
And it looks old. I might be able to sell it to a museum or maybe somebody that collects historical Western stuff.
Only for it to later be revealed as worth thousands. Suddenly, rusty gold stopped sounding cute. It started sounding like a business strategy. Defenders argued this was just how antiques worked. Nobody was forced. Deals were agreed to. But critics weren't buying it. The show had spent years framing itself as respectful and educational. Watching seasoned professionals leverage expertise against uninformed or elderly sellers didn't feel like history preservation. It felt like a polite hustle. And while viewers were arguing online about capitalism with a smile, things behind the scenes were quietly falling apart. In 2017, Frank Fritz was arrested for driving the wrong way on an Iowa interstate while under the influence. Alcohol, Xanax, mugshot, the full reality TV starter pack. The show barely acknowledged it. Frank returned to filming, but the cracks were spreading fast.
Danielle on the phone, she said you'd be
right.
over. If you were from a museum, I'd tell you I've got a lot of artifacts.
Behind the scenes, his health was deteriorating. Years of living with Crohn's disease, chronic pain, and back problems led to a massive spinal surgery in 2020. Around the same time, he entered rehab for alcohol addiction, spending 77 days trying to put his life back together. This should have been the moment the show slowed down. Instead, it was the moment everything broke. After March 2020, Frank stopped appearing. Viewers were told it was temporary. Health reasons, recovery, totally normal. But in July 2021, the History Channel dropped the real news. Frank Fritz would not be returning. No tribute, no farewell episode, just a press release and a quiet erasure. Half of the duo that built the show was gone. And Frank wasn't silent about it. In interviews, he revealed that Mike hadn't spoken to him in nearly 2 years. Not during surgery, not during rehab, not during recovery. He described feeling abandoned and slowly written out of a show he helped create. It wasn't reality TV drama anymore. It was a friendship autopsy.
Danny, what up?
I have something totally amazing for you.
Amaze me.
Okay.
Mike responded with a careful statement about ups and downs and wishing Frank well. Frank called it fake. Danielle Colby publicly sided with Mike, suggesting Frank's own behavior had led to his exit. Fans immediately picked sides. Social media turned into a war zone. Bring back Frank. Fire Mike Wolfe. The show died with Frank. Facebook comments became digital bar fights. Reddit threads analyzed every interview like true crime evidence. Ratings slid, dropping over 20% within months. For a show built on warmth and nostalgia, it suddenly felt cold and corporate. And then, as if to seal the collapse, Frank suffered a massive stroke in 2022. Outrage shifted into concern. Hashtags turned into prayers. Mike posted a message asking fans to pray for his friend.
Want to take a look at that stuff?
Sure.
Ever since we rolled up on this property, I've been jonesing to see what Chris and Ward have storage units.
To some, it felt genuine. To others, it felt like damage control arriving 2 years late. Either way, the illusion was gone. The peak of the collapse wasn't a single scandal. It was the realization that everything holding the show together had been fragile. Spontaneity, fairness, brotherhood. Once those pillars fell, all that remained was a long-running reality show trying desperately to pretend it was still special. And deep down, everyone knew it wasn't. By the time American Pickers reached its later seasons, the problem wasn't that it had changed too much, but that it had finally stopped pretending. Once the illusion cracked, there was nothing left to distract from how thin the format really was. After more than a decade, the show had completely exhausted its own mechanics. Every episode followed the same rhythm. The dramatic reveal, the rehearsed backstory, the low offer framed as folksy charm, and the handshake that signaled moral closure. What once felt like discovery had turned into routine, not comfortingly familiar, but mechanically predictable. You weren't watching history anymore, you were watching a template.
Of him, you know?
We used that inside the sideshow as an extra added attraction. 10 cents.
The departure of Fritz exposed this even further. Frank wasn't just a co-host, he was resistant. He questioned prices, disrupted Mike's momentum, and occasionally made scenes awkward, which paradoxically made them feel human. Without him, the show lost tension. New pickers cycled in, but they felt like brand extensions rather than people with shared history. The emotional core vanished, leaving Mike Wolfe as the uncontested center of a show that was never meant to be a solo act. At the same time, the audience itself had changed. In the 2000s, lowball negotiations could be brushed off as business. In the 2000s and 20s, they looked like power imbalances wrapped in nostalgia. Viewers became less willing to laugh along, especially as broader conversations about exploitation, authenticity, and media manipulation entered the mainstream. What once felt charming now felt calculated. And then there's the simple reality of timing. Cable television was dying, irony was thriving, and American pickers quietly slid from comfort viewing into meme territory. Rusty Gold stopped sounding poetic and started sounding like a punchline.
As soon as I picked him up, I felt a connection. But then, when I heard his name, Wolf Boy, it was like I found my long-lost brother.
The show didn't become outrageously bad. It became irrelevant. And in entertainment, that's often the more terminal condition. American Pickers didn't collapse because it offended people. It faded because the fantasy no longer convinced anyone, and the format had nothing else to offer once belief was gone. In the end, American Pickers didn't crash in a blaze of scandal or get dragged off the air in disgrace. It faded out the way old objects do when you stop pretending they're priceless. Quietly, slowly, with a layer of dust settling over something that once mattered a lot more. For a while, the fantasy really did work. Watching two guys roam the country, unearthing forgotten pieces of Americana, felt comforting in a world that was speeding up and hollowing out. The show convinced millions of people that history was still hiding in barns, that honest deals still happened with handshakes, and that friendship could survive fame, money, and 15 seasons of cable television. That's not nothing.
This pick had it all. We heard some epic stories, we met some fascinating people. It's a pleasure, man.
For a brief moment, American Pickers made capitalism look gentle and nostalgia look meaningful. But the same fantasy that powered its rise also guaranteed its downfall. Because once viewers realized the fines weren't spontaneous, the negotiations weren't as fair as advertised, and the friendship at the heart of the show had fractured beyond repair. The illusion couldn't be patched back together. When Fritz disappeared, the soul of the show went with him, and no amount of new faces or social media damage control could replace a decade of shared history. By the time the series officially wound down after 15 years, the question wasn't whether it had failed, but whether it had simply outlived the era that allowed it to exist. American Pickers belonged to a moment when audiences still wanted to believe that reality TV could be sincere, that experts could be trusted, and that entertainment didn't always need a villain. The 2020s were less forgiving. Nostalgia alone wasn't enough anymore.
Here. I don't know what's in here, but I think that this is something that Mike would like a lot.
So what does this say about entertainment, media, or us? Maybe that we don't just consume stories, we consume trust. And once that trust is gone, all the rusty gold in the world can't buy it back. Anyway, like, subscribe, and tell us which reality show should be put out of its misery next. Because somewhere out there, another perfectly good fantasy is waiting to be discovered and immediately flipped for content.